Welcome to my channel. What if the ghosts of secret wars never stayed buried? Maren Shaw, a former Air Force pilot turned civilian rescuer, answers a forbidden distress call and reawakens a Black Ops frequency long thought dead. What begins as a mercy flight spirals into a shadow war of erased names, hunted survivors, and a network of operatives returning from the grave. The sky remembers its guardians, and the ghosts are flying again. You ever look up at the sky and wonder who's still out there, watching, even when they're no longer supposed to be? My name is Maren Shaw. I'm 39, a former Air Force pilot turned medical responder. These days, I run a nonprofit air transport operation called Falcon Reach, flying critical supplies and medevac runs out of a rundown airfield near Albion, Montana. To most, I'm just a skilled civilian pilot with a taste for backcountry rescues. But I've flown airspace most people don't even know exists. The kind that has no transponder beacons or flight plans. The kind where you don't come back unless you're faster, quieter, and luckier than death. My bird is a silver twin-prop Piper Navajo. Tail number N4721Z. She looks like a museum piece, but beneath the aging paint job are avionics no civilian should have. Custom-tuned engines. Encrypted comms. Shielded wiring. Modified flight control surfaces. Everything black market legal, barely. I maintain it all myself. No ground crew. No mechanics. Just me and the hum of the desert wind as I prep each morning. Nobody in town knows what I used to be. That I once flew under a call sign no one dares utter on open channels. That I've walked runways carved into jungle clearings and landed blind in mountain passes under heavy fire. They think I'm eccentric. That I'm just another vet trying to stay useful. Maybe I am. But then came the call. Tuesday, 0600. Emergency frequency lit up red. A biomedical research station deep inside Sector Kilo, a no-fly military zone tucked in the Bitterroot Range, sent a priority medical distress. Cardiac failure. No ground access. No time for red tape. And absolutely no clearance for anyone like me. Sector Kilo has been locked down for 16 years. Military drones patrol the perimeter. Satellite overlays get blurred in public feeds. You don't fly there unless you want to disappear. But I recognize the voice on that transmission. The phrasing. The cadence. The deliberate pause before saying, non-revivable window narrowing. That was code. Old code. Phantom code. I had 5 minutes to decide. I didn't ask permission. I powered up N4721Z, rolled out onto the empty tarmac, and turned her nose north toward forbidden skies. My fuel estimates were tight. I didn't care. My hands knew what to do before I did. I didn't feel the takeoff. I just felt the silence the second the wheels left the ground. That old switch in me flipped again, the one that only wakes up when things go wrong. And I was headed straight into what used to be our hunting ground. Sector Kilo. I was going home. At 19,000 feet, just shy of Sector Kilo's boundary, I throttled back and rechecked the NAV grid. The terrain ahead was unforgiving. Vertical cliffs, frozen lakes, radar shadows. But I wasn't flying blind. I had flown through worse with less. Much less. I knew what crossing that line meant. Sector Kilo's border wasn't marked on public charts. It was invisible, but every fiber in my body felt it the second we pierced it. The old frequencies started spiking. I'd crossed into airspace where people vanish without record. And I'd done it solo in a twin prop with zero authorization. 10 minutes later, I picked up the first signal. Radar ping, military grade, multiband. Then a second ping. Fast. Coordinated. F-35s? Maybe. No. Faster. Angrier. F-22 Raptors. They came in high and tight, one off my left wing, the other sweeping behind me. Sleek. Beautiful. Deadly. They were flying intercept pattern, not escort. My transponder squawked civilian ID. Useless. They already knew what I was. A violator. Unidentified aircraft. This is Echo Flight. You are entering restricted airspace. Alter course immediately or be fired upon. You have 60 seconds to comply. I didn't answer. I held course. The pilot off my wing circled slightly lower. I could see the canopy glint. He was looking straight at me, helmeted, unreadable, likely younger than the calluses on my palms. His tone crackled again. This is not a drill. Turn. Around. Still, I said nothing. Not yet. I waited until they flanked tighter, the lead prepping for a warning shot. Then I flipped the switch beneath my panel. The one that hadn't been touched in 12 years. Channel 7. The frequency that doesn't officially exist. The one we swore never to use again. Echo 0. I said into the void, my voice low and steady. Mission override. Phantom Protocol 7 Bravo 4. Clearance, Maren Shaw. Authorization, Ghost Signal Alpha. Silence. Then the lead Raptor peeled off so fast, it left a vapor arc. The other slid back into escort position. In the command center somewhere below, someone was scrambling, pulling up records that weren't supposed to exist. That code wasn't in any current military log. Because Phantom protocols were locked, sealed, and buried with the unit that didn't officially survive Operation Scythe. But I did. And now they knew. Back in Albion, they think I'm just a desert pilot with a habit of flying through dust storms. They have no idea that once, just once, I was the voice in a darkened command tent telling a 6-man team they had 7 minutes to move before artillery wiped their grid off the map. That voice had weight. It was mine. And now, for the first time in over a decade, it had returned. I heard the tension drain from the comms. Even the Raptor's engines eased into softer throttle. My instruments flickered, signal delays, relayed pings. The control center was in chaos. In some underground installation, someone had just heard a name that wasn't supposed to come back. Maren Shaw. A voice asked finally, strained, hushed. Male. Older. It wasn't a pilot. It was someone behind a desk, someone who remembered the last time that frequency went live. Alive and inbound, I replied. Medical priority. I need landing clearance at grid Kilo 12. Passenger critical. There was a pause, longer than it should have been. Understood. Clearance granted. Escort in place. We're with you. They weren't just granting access. They were unsealing a piece of history. Because Channel 7 belonged to Phantom Echo, and Phantom Echo had died in the Himalayas. At least, that's what the files said. But here I was, 30,000 feet up, with 2 Raptors forming AV escort like I was a damn 4-star general. And they weren't doing it for me. They were doing it because of what I used to represent. 12 years ago, Phantom Echo wasn't just a Black Ops unit. We were the last call. The quiet end of the line. No uniforms. No flags. Just outcomes. We inserted where diplomats couldn't reach and where drones couldn't see. The ones who walked into war zones not to start fights, but to finish what no one else could. And when we dissolved, they buried us beneath honorless paperwork. No graves. No announcements. Just silence. But now, that silence had cracked. Grid Kilo 12 came into view like a ghost from memory. Low silver buildings tucked into jagged snowline, ringed by camouflage netting and sensor towers. It hadn't changed. Not in 12 years. Same radar array. Same unmarked helipad turned landing strip. The only difference now was the medical team standing ready on the tarmac. I descended clean, approach angle shallow, flaps extended. The Raptors held formation until final descent, then banked out in a perfect arc, giving me space. A show of respect. Of reverence. I touched down smooth, tires biting into frost-worn asphalt. Engines hummed steady. No fanfare. Just the crunch of boots as medics approached my aircraft. The patient was already on a stretcher, preloaded with IVs and biometric monitors. His vitals were bad. Heart rate spiking, O2 saturation erratic. He'd coded once en route to the landing strip. Barely stabilized. This was a race against seconds. As the med team loaded him into my Cessna, one of them looked up at me. Young, maybe 25, face pale under her helmet. "Are you really Phantom 7? She asked, voice barely audible over the wind. I didn't answer. I just checked the straps, adjusted the monitor leads, and slid into the cockpit. The flight to St. Helena Regional was 71 minutes by air. I made it in 58. The entire way, I monitored his vitals through auxiliary readouts I'd wired into my panel years ago. Out of habit, not hope. There was no backup. No second chance. If I lost him midair, that was it. I talked to him. Not loudly. Just steady. My voice was the only rhythm he had to anchor to. I told him he was going to make it. That the sky was on our side. That we'd cheated worse odds before. Somewhere over the divide, he stabilized. By the time we touched down in Helena, the trauma team was waiting, doors open, gurney prepped. He had a fighting chance now. Maybe more than that. I stayed in the cockpit, watching them wheel him away. One of the nurses looked up and saluted. Not military, just respect. I exhaled for the first time in over an hour. Mission complete. But that wasn't the end. Back in Albion, I found a package waiting in my hangar. No return address. Just a name I hadn't heard since the day Phantom Echo was burned from the books. A note inside, handwritten in perfect block letters. Still flying. Still listening. The frequency remains open. D. Weiss. Colonel Devin Weiss. That name hit harder than anything else. He had been our last handler before Phantom Echo vanished off paper and into shadow. A man with eyes like winter and hands that shook only after the job was done. Weiss was the one who called us ghosts before anyone else did. The package also contained something else, something that made my breath hitch. A faded shoulder patch. Half burnt, torn across the edge, but still legible. A single stitched word barely hanging on. Echo. I stared at it in silence, fingers tracing the scorch marks. My first instinct was to shove it away, bury it with the rest of the past. But I didn't. I pinned it to the wall above my workbench, beside the old paper map of Sector Kilo. A reminder. That week, something started shifting. My calls increased. Small mountain towns with no hospitals requested pickups. Rural clinics sent encrypted pings for medicine drops. All off the record. All urgent. And always routed through a shadowy third party. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then came the real sign. A voice crackled through Channel 7 again. At 0400, clear as a church bell. A woman. Calm. Steady. Phantom 9 requesting confirm. Sector Echo Kilo operational again. I almost dropped my wrench. Phantom 9 was Jules Mercer. She'd flown recon with me over the Pakistan border. Fastest instincts I'd ever seen in a cockpit. She died in an extraction gone bad. At least, that's what the debrief said. I keyed the mic with a shaking hand. Phantom 7. Confirmed alive. Echo Kilo is green. A beat of silence. Then, copy. Good to hear your voice, Shaw. No code words. No cover signals. Just that. And suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. That day, the sky felt different. Like it remembered us again. Not long after, I started hearing the rumors. A rescue team pinned during a wildfire in Idaho reported being let out by a woman who vanished before they could thank her. A pilot flew an unmarked cargo plane through a storm no commercial aircraft could penetrate, dropped 6 pallets of antibiotics onto a clinic roof, then disappeared into the clouds. No photos, no names, just whispers. Someone was waking up the old network. The ghosts were coming home. It started like a rumor, drifting between old call signs like embers from a dead fire. Former medics I hadn't heard from in years left encrypted voicemails on burned phones that hadn't rung since the Himalayas. Still upright. Still watching, one message said. Another, heard the frequency light up. If you're out there, Shaw, thanks for keeping it alive. It wasn't just me anymore. Across the country, unexplained interventions began happening. A missing ranger in Oregon rescued by an unregistered drone team. A narcotics lab in El Salvador hit with pinpoint air strikes no government owned up to. Civilians evacuated from a collapsed dam in Nepal with surgical coordination that couldn't have come from any aid agency. Each incident had one thing in common, no official signature. But those of us who used to ride the silent lines, we knew. Phantom Echo wasn't back. Not officially, not organized. But the instincts, the people, the code, they were breathing again. And the world was starting to remember what it felt like when ghosts flew cover. A week after the Sector Kilo mission, I received another message. This one routed through 6 nodes, disguised as weather telemetry. But I decrypted it on site. Asset eyes, 13 confirmed your reactivation. Recommend passive surveillance remain dormant. Civilian life intact? I stared at it for a long time. That phrase, civilian life intact, was code for, do you want to come back in? I didn't respond. Not immediately. I left the message blinking in the corner of my screen while I walked the flight line and watched the sun rise through a break in the clouds. Because the answer wasn't simple. Was I still a civilian? After all this, the old instincts had come back too easily. The clean calculations, the breath pacing, the split-second decisions between risk and reward. They didn't belong to a medical pilot. They belonged to someone who used to carry bodies out of the dark. But I hadn't picked up a weapon. I hadn't fired a shot. I'd flown a mercy run, fast, precise, surgical. So I sent the reply they'd expect. One sentence, No embellishment. Mission maintained. Frequency guarded. Civilian cover remains in play. They'd understand. No, I wasn't back in. But I hadn't left either. The next day, a nondescript envelope arrived at the hangar, wedged under the fuel tank access panel of my Cessna. No markings. Just heavy paper, folded twice. Inside was a list. 7 names. No ranks. No addresses. Just call signs. Warden 3. Lark 6. Echo 9. And near the bottom, Phantom 4. That name stopped my breath cold. Phantom 4 was Malachi Rusk. My field partner. Navigator. The one who always covered my 6, even in places we weren't supposed to fly. He had vanished during the Istanbul tunnel breach, assumed dead when contact dropped mid-mission. I stared at the list like it might rearrange itself if I blinked. Each call sign had a timestamp beside it. Some recent, some over a year old. Coordinates, too. Mostly rural, isolated, foreign. But Phantom 4? His timestamp was just 2 days ago. And the location? Crow's Line, Alberta. A place even more restricted than Sector Kilo. A no-go zone marked only by black ink and blank files. Intel used to call it a terminal sandbox. Go in, don't come back. We never had operations there, because those who tried didn't return. So what was Russ doing there? Or more haunting, who had tracked him there? Because whoever compiled this list hadn't just found his last signal. They were keeping tabs, watching, mapping out survivors who were supposed to be legends, not living. That meant someone was trying to wake us up, or someone was hunting us down. My hand hovered over the radio for a long time. The Channel 7 switch stared back at me like it was daring me to reach. I didn't flip it. Not yet. Instead, I copied the list by hand and burned the original. Then I packed my survival bag, checked fuel, and charted a course. If Malachi Rusk was still out there, I owed it to him to find out. Not because I missed him, but because ghosts don't leave each other behind. Crow's Line wasn't on any flight chart. The northern edge of Alberta had terrain so jagged and air currents so vicious that even mapping drones gave it a wide berth. The mountains weren't especially tall, but they moved. Not physically, but with the wind, the signals, the magnetic pull. It was like the land breathed differently there. I made the trip in a single push. No refuel. Just auxiliary tanks and steady throttle. I'd prepped for 4 days, but brought enough for 10. I didn't know what I was flying into. The closer I got, the more my instruments disagreed with themselves. GPS stuttered. Altimeter danced. Even the artificial horizon began to slant in gentle pulses, like the world itself was off balance. Then my signal reader chirped. A frequency ping, faint, encrypted, bleeding through the static like a ghost dragging a chain. It was Phantom 4's ID tag. Not a voice, not a message. Just a handshake signal. One only our unit used. The timestamp matched the list. I tightened my approach. Below me, the terrain narrowed into a canyon choked with mist. Old logging roads twisted through pines, long since reclaimed by moss and shadow. I followed the ping down to a flat ridge barely wide enough for landing. It wasn't even a clearing, just wind-scoured stone. I set the Cessna down hard, tires skidding a few feet before biting. Silence swallowed the aircraft the second I killed the engine. I waited. No sound. No movement. Then I saw it. An old trail marker, military issue, but foreign. Weathered. Carved with something familiar. A tiny, etched insignia. The outline of a phoenix over crossed blades. Phantom Echo's final mission patch. No one outside the unit had ever seen it. And here it was. I should have felt fear. I didn't. I felt, watched. A quiet shuffle echoed through the trees, so faint I thought it was wind. I turned, instinct ready, and from the shadows emerged a figure in a weather-bleached jacket, hood up, limp on the left leg, but eyes locked dead on mine. Still flying, Shaw? The voice rasped. Deeper now, older, but I'd know it anywhere. Malachi, I whispered. He grinned. Took you long enough. Malachi Rusk hadn't died. He'd vanished on purpose. After Istanbul, he said, as we crouched near the nose of my plane under fading light. It became clear Phantom Echo was never meant to survive. We weren't just assets, they made us into risks. I listened, arms crossed, wind clawing at my sleeves. The moment the mission went south, I tried fallback comms. Nothing. Blackout wasn't an accident. We were meant to burn. And once I made it out, I saw what they'd done, cleared the files, erased our trail, ghosted us out of the system. You've been hiding ever since. I asked. He shook his head. Not hiding. Watching. Mapping who made it. Who didn't. That list, the one I'd found. He had written it. I couldn't contact you, he added. Not directly. Channel 7 was too risky until you lit it up. When the sky went quiet that day in Kilo, I knew you were still in the air. He reached into his coat and pulled out a weatherproof pouch. Inside was a hand-drawn chart marked with old flight grids, known call signs, and red-inked circles where former operatives had gone dark. Some of them are dead, he said quietly. Others disappeared the same way I did. But not all by choice. You think someone's picking us off. I know they are. The map showed patterns, strategic removals, not coincidences. All centered around former Phantom Ops who still had field-level clearance to certain fail-safe protocols. Ones that were never fully revoked. Someone wants the last threads of Echo erased, Rusk said. The kind of purge you do when you're about to repurpose something dangerous. What's the target? That's just it, he muttered. I don't know. But whoever it is, they're not from outside. This isn't foreign. This is internal. Quiet. Surgical. Like us. We sat there a long time. No radios. No signals. Just wind and the old ghosts standing watch between the trees. Weiss knows, I said finally. He sent me a message. Rusk's jaw tightened. Then he's either trying to warn you, or he's the next one on the list. I finished. He looked up at the darkening sky. Then we've got a choice to make. We departed before dawn, lifting off from the frostbitten ridge without speaking much more. Rusk's limp didn't stop him from co-piloting like old times, checking bearings, managing fuel trim, reading terrain like it spoke a language only he knew. We were heading south, back toward Albion. Not because we had answers, but because we had a direction. Because there was one last move we could make before the board went dark again. Colonel Weiss. If he was still alive, he'd know what they were after. And if he wasn't, then the reckoning had already begun. But we never made it to Albion. At 15,000 feet, a signal cracked over Channel 7, loud, urgent, and very much not one of ours. Echo frequency, you are flagged. Return to ground coordinates now. This is not a warning. It was a voice with clearance. Someone who had authorization to use our old channel. Someone wearing our skin. I looked at Rusk. They're spoofing Echo IDs. He nodded grimly. Which means they've accessed part of the archive. Maybe even the logs. Then we're too late. We're just early enough to do something. We broke formation, dove into cloud cover, and activated every jamming protocol we had left. The Cessna wasn't a fighter jet, but it was faster than they thought. And ghosts don't play by airspace rules. Back in Albion, the hangar was untouched. But someone had been there. A footprint in the dust. A shadow in the CCTV that flickered for only 3 frames. They were looking for me. For us. But they didn't take the patch on the wall. Or the map. Or the switch marked Channel 7. Because they didn't think we'd come back. Rusk and I didn't say goodbye. He left as quietly as he came, disappearing into the mist with only a glance. We'll signal when it's time, he said. And I knew what he meant. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about preservation. About guarding something older than any mission brief or medal. That night, I stood under the hangar floodlights, staring at the sky. I keyed Channel 7 and said the words I hadn't spoken in 12 years. This is Phantom 7. We are not gone. We are airborne. Frequency remains open. I let it sit there, silent, waiting. Then one by one, old voices replied. Briefly, calmly. Names I thought lost. Call signs once thought buried. The sky, for the first time in over a decade, remembered its guardians. We may never return to service. We may never fly as one again. But they'll never again forget that someone still watches from above. We are the ghosts. And Channel 7 is never closed.